Okay, so we're going now through the second chapter of our lesson for today. So we're going to discuss in general how the whole process of kind of make an overview of the world economy first. So to give some perspective to what we're discussing today, please mute as you come. Thank you. In the early 20th century, economic integration was at 10%. We're saying today it is at 50%. So this shows how interconnected we are today, the whole world. And this is in terms of the whole world, while specific regions, like for example, the oldest kind of most integrated regions, this is the European Union and NAFTA. They're very different from each other, but nevertheless, kind of one of the most integrated regions. Global competitors have displaced or absorbed local ones. Please mute, thank you. The new realities in which we find ourselves is that capital movements have replaced trade as the driving force in the world economy. What this means is that if in the past trade was the most important, just 1 second, I want to see. Mute, but I cannot see who needs to be mute. Okay. Okay, I think I managed to mute. Sorry for the interruption. So if in the past, the main forces of which were kind of pushing globalization was the movement of trade and services, now capital has become the biggest source of growth, the movement of capital itself. Production has become uncoupled from employment. Now, what this means is that production is not anymore so dependent on people, and we're going to see this more and more developing in the future as technology is exchanging employees. Also, the world economy, not individual countries, are the dominating factor. There are a couple of things that are important in this process of globalization. One of them were the political changes which happened in the last 30 years, let's say. So the Cold War, the struggle between capitalism and socialism, which began in 1917, is over. So as a result, a lot of countries, Eastern Europe, but also China and many other countries, have integrated into the global economy. And that has been a major force. Another big force is e-commerce. So in general, the technology has diminished the importance of national barriers. And so basically, as a result of e-commerce, today a company can become global from the first day of operation. In the past, that wasn't possible. So you would always start with you would be present first in a local economy, then gradually you would start growing. Today, we have companies which from day one of operation, they can be global. Also, as consumers, today through the different platforms, I'm sure you are well aware and benefiting from them, national barriers have been removed, and we can now trade and buy things from anywhere. So this has forced companies to reevaluate their business models. They could not anymore continue in the old way. And if anybody had any, how should I say, questions or concerns whether this relates to them, I think COVID removed the final barrier. So as we found ourselves in lockdowns, I think more and more people actually found and understood the importance of e-commerce and adopted new ways of doing things. In general, also globalization has made it harder to pigeonhole economies within the for-sale matrix. So basically, today it's becoming more and more important to, as we are entering new markets, to really understand what is the type of economy. What this means here, that it's harder to pigeonhole economies within the for-sale matrix. This means that it's very difficult to say which economy is what. In the past, it was very easy to say, okay, this is capitalism, this is communism, this is socialism. Today, it's we have these new mixes as far as levels of development of the economy. For example, we have different stages. Like we have some economies in advanced industrial state, others we call emerging or economies in transitions. We have developing nations and so on. Also, what's important is we evaluate the countries we enter is the type of government. Do we have a monarchy, dictatorship? We have a tyrant, one-party system, two-party system? Is the country dominated by another state? Or is it a democracy? Is it a terrorist? I mean, there's a lot of things we need to understand. It's not there are many layers. Of course, a big part of evaluating a country, both as a market as well as a production location, is to what level we can experience free trade. Is the country part of a trading bloc? Does it have, how is the currency fluctuating? Do we have a free floating currency, or is there some control? For example, a currency board means that the currency is fixed to some other currency. How is the exchange happening? Is there a control over the exchange? So these are all crucial questions we need to understand, because all these aspects are impacting our future business. Also, very big importance is infrastructure, transportation, energy, but also communications today. Without access to quality internet today, no business can function. And of course, the other aspect of how is ownership? So is it state, private, or mixed? These are also important questions. Other questions that interest businesses in general: what is the level of services provided by the state? To what level they need to, things are regulated as far as pensions, healthcare, education. Also, to how are the government institutions functioning? Is there transparency? Are there standards on which we can rely? Or is there corruption? Is there a lot of red tape? We also call when there's a lot of administrative barriers. In general, when we have a lot of red tape, this also brings opportunities for corruption. We also need to understand, so there might be laws in the country, so it can be written that this and this and this is the law, but it's also important that these laws enforced. There are a lot of countries in which the laws exist, but then they are not enforced, or the court system is compromised, meaning that it's very difficult if you have a conflict with another business to actually enforce contracts. So then this also needs to be taken into consideration. Also, the nature of the market itself. It's important to understand, is it an entrepreneurial market, like where you can take high risk, but then you have the option of high reward? Or is it more socialized market? So more socialized market means that certain aspects of the economy are controlled by the government. So the government steps in and organizes certain aspects. So are there also prices that are controlled by government, wages controlled by the government, and so on. So as we try to understand the economic system of a country, these are some principal ways in which we can do it. Although it's important to say that as many other models, this is just a model which is not fully describing the full situation. It's just, in other words, sometimes it's difficult to put a country in one of these locations, so it's a more theoretical construct. But the main points here are that if we have private resource ownership and market resource allocation, we have a market capitalism. Completely opposite to that is like state resource ownership. So in other words, the state owns the factors of production and in general other resources in the country. And if we have command resource allocation, this is a centrally planned socialism. The other possibilities are centrally planned capitalism, where we have private resource ownership and command resource allocation, and then we have market socialism, which is the opposite. So we're gonna now speak a little more what characterizes these cases. So the first one is market capitalism. So this is where individuals and firms are free to allocate resources. Majority, if not all of production resources are privately owned. The markets are driven by consumers. What this means is if there's a demand for McDonald's, we create more McDonald's. We don't tell people, oh, McDonald's is not healthy, so we should restrict the number of McDonald's in the country. So demand drives the economy, the demand, the taste of the consumers. Then government role is only to promote competition, to ensure that no company has domination of the market, and also to ensure consumer protection. There are a few here system which we can recognize within that. It's the we have first the Anglo-Saxon model. So countries like United States, Canada, and Great Britain follow that. We also have social market economy model, which is more like countries like Germany, France, and Italy. And then the Nordic model, which is Sweden and Norway. So basically in the further we go here down this grade, the more the state interferes into the market. So the Anglo-Saxon model is the most free in terms of interference of the government, while the Nordic model is probably one of the most, out of the developed countries, definitely this is the model where we see the biggest involvement in government, mainly through, I mean, actually several different ways, but one of the ways we also differentiate this is by the general social safety net. So in the Nordic model, the government takes a lot of money, but then it provides a lot of social care to people, and vice versa. For example, it's exactly the opposite in the United States. So, for example, healthcare is on a much higher level because the state takes bigger role in Sweden and Norway than it's in the States. We also have centrally planned socialism. So we said that this is the opposite of market capitalism. So the state here holds very broad powers. It completely decides how much. So there's no supply and demand here. I mean, they still have to think of supply and demand, but basically centrally it's decided how much to be produced and in what quantities. When consumers are dependent on what's available. So if whatever is decided to be produced, this is what they can have. There's much less, so it's much more difficult to, we don't have this usual supply and demand connection, which we have in the other version we were just discussing. So the government owns entire industries and controls distribution. Typically in such situations, demand exceeds supply. So in other words, people demand more choice and more variety and more quantity than the state is willing to provide. And as a rule, in planned economy, we have much less focus on differentiating product. So you would have, I don't know, you won't have hundreds of cars, models of cars. You will have, for example, 3 models of cars available. So countries which used to have centrally planned socialism were the countries in the former USSR. So these are the markets that were together with Russia in the USSR, but also Eastern Europe, China, India. So a lot of these markets already moved away from this. I mean, way away, so to say, towards market capitalism. But China, India, and a few other countries are they have this new ways of, I mean, China has its own model, so it's kind of a new economy by itself. They're doing a lot of things for the first time in terms of this structure of what is private, what is state-owned. They're being pioneers in terms of how they've done things. So centrally planned capitalism, this is what we were talking more in the Swedish countries, in the Nordic countries, sorry, in Sweden and the Nordic countries. So as we said, this is an economic system in which command resource allocation is used extensively. That means the government is deciding the resource allocation in an environment of private resource ownership. So the factors of production, the industries are in private hands, but the state plays a big role in deciding how resources are allocated. So for example, the Swedish government controls 2/3 of all spending in the economy. So this is a huge percent. What's interesting is, despite many of the Nordic countries, often examples of very high standards of living, and in general, kind of people are living well. So they've been always an example of something maybe countries need to strive towards. But what's interesting is, we're giving you here example that the Swedish government is considering moving towards privatization. So we're considering reducing the role of government. And that's interesting given that many consider them an example of something the rest of the world should follow. The reason for this is because each of these systems has pros and cons. Each of them has positive, each of them has negatives. And depending on what stage of the global economy we're in and what else is happening, we may or may not be able to support certain model. There's also, when we talk about the different countries, we need to recognize different stages of market development. The World Bank in general has defined 4 stages of development using the gross national income as a base. So initially, there was a few countries, the so-called BEMS countries, which were identified as countries experiencing rapid economic growth, and that means countries of interest for future expansion. So they were primarily countries in Central Europe, which were moving from planned economy to market economy, as I mentioned earlier, but also some countries in Latin America and Asia. Today, the focus is on BRICS countries. We already mentioned them. So Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. As I mentioned, Russia will probably, will kind of fall out of that focus for a while. Another factor that's very important when we're considering new markets is the economic freedom. And the rankings of economic freedom that are used is, so some countries are considered free economically, others are considering mostly free, mostly unfree, and repressed. So basically these are 4 different levels. When we are deciding the ranking, we are including things like, so these rankings are being, it's information we can find official on each country we approach. So when these ranks are being prepared, things that are taken into consideration are things like trade policy, taxation policy, capital flows and foreign investment, banking policy, wage and price control, property rights, and black market. So this is, in general, what we are evaluating here is the ability of free movement of trades and basically products and services, people, capital, intellectual property rights, and technology. So as well as the availability of the supporting services, like, for example, banking, which we cannot obviously function today without a healthy banking system. Okay. So here are some examples of countries ranked based on their economic freedom. This is from 2017. So the first 5 countries include Hong Kong, Singapore, New Zealand, Australia, and Switzerland. The last 5 would be Eritrea, Congo, Cuba, Venezuela, and North Korea. So obviously in between these, there's a lot of different possibilities. What's interesting is, for example, what the growth that has happened in the United Arab Emirates, for example, which, as you see, is now ranked more free than, for example, the United States. So there are a few also countries that are not being ranked for a variety of reasons. So if we're considering going into these countries, then we need to find our own research, make our own research. The other division of countries is based on income. So obviously, when we are entering a new market, if we are interested in this market as a market where we can sell our goods and services, we want to know what is the buying power of the population, what are their income levels, what can they afford. So income becomes an important factor, but also if we're considering a country as a production location. Also, obviously, we want to know what our costs of operation will be. So low-income countries are countries which have GNI per capita of $1,005 or less. So here we're talking, this is GNI per capita per year. So countries, low-income countries in general are characterized with limited industrialization. That means a big dependency on the primary sector. This is farming and similar activities. That's why we're saying here high percentage of population is involved in farming. So this is one of the reasons why they're not, incomes are not very high, because in general, the level of productivity in the primary industry is much smaller than in the secondary economy. In other words, in factories where we in industrial in the industry, basically. Such countries usually have very high birth rates when compared to developed economies. Usually they have low literacy rates. It means that education is not on a good level. They rely heavily on foreign aid, and usually there's political instability and unrest. A lot of these countries are concentrated in sub-Saharan Africa, so this is not whole Africa, but one area of Africa. The problem with these countries is that it's very difficult. It's like as we are deepening into these times of globalization, the ability of a country to compete on global markets is very connected to education, to infrastructure, to availability of resources, level of capabilities in the country. So it's kind of it's very difficult for countries to get out of the state unless they get some foreign, not just aid, but foreign direct investment, as in new factories, new possibilities to improve the productive potential of the country. That's why we're saying that globalization is actually has been a huge factor in reducing poverty in many countries. So it has lifted many countries out of similar states. Lower middle income countries are countries with GNI per capita between $1,006 and $3,000, almost $4,000. So they are characterized with rapidly expanding consumer markets. This means that people are having access to opportunities, to jobs, which means they also, so as people are getting access to better jobs, they also want better living standards. So in general, consumption is increasing vastly when we are experiencing this development. They also they're not fully dependent on the primary sector. They have the presence of certain industries, usually very labor intensive, such as footwear, textiles, toys, things like that. Usually in these countries, people are motivated to get access to good jobs and to better opportunities. So as a rule, in these markets, multinationals can find cheap but motivated labor. Out of the lower middle income countries, India is the only BRICS nation. So this means that they still, it actually demonstrates the potential of India, because India is a huge country. Certain areas are much more developed, but on the average, this is the GNI, we're in this range as far as GNI. It only improves, it only further shows the potential of his country, because it's with all the development it's experiencing now and with its size, there's huge opportunities ahead. So that's why many companies are moving to India now. Not so much because, I mean, obviously the average level of income is not that high, but the opportunities are huge. Then we have upper middle income countries. So these have roughly between 4,000 and 12,000 GNP per capita. They are characterized by, they're known for rapidly industrializing. So there's a lot of factories being built, and employment is moving from agriculture to industry to urban. There's urbanization that's going on. This means people are moving out of villages into bigger cities. That also means that wages are rising, because when we have a huge amount of new factories being built, there's a bigger demand for people who are educated, who have who can work in these factories. So this pushes also wages up. These countries are also characterized by high literacy rates, and advanced education. This means that people are not only literate, but they are going after much higher education, because they see the possibility that this opens for them. Countries which are here, the main BRICS countries, so with the exclusion of India, so we have Brazil, Russia, China, South Africa. They still have much lower wage costs than advanced countries, which makes them very attractive. For example, we're giving you here example that Nestle has invested 83 billion into developing this plant in Brazil, and millions more around the country. So this shows you the level of investment. So when a company such as this one invests this amount of money into a production facility like this totally moves the economy to another level. It provides a lot of opportunities both to people and the local economy. We also have the so-called newly industrializing economies. These are lower, middle, and upper income economies, which are characterized by the highest sustained rates of economic growth. What this means is that over a certain relatively long period, they have very high economic growth, but not as a kind of a one-time event, but as is something that's sustained. It means continues for many years with this at this high level. So such countries are usually characterized by a lot of exports of manufactured and refined products. So they're more highly industrialized. Such countries, for example, one group of such countries which was identified is the so-called Next 11 or N11, and this includes countries like Egypt, Indonesia, the Philippines, Mexico, Turkey. So these are economies which are kind of really on the watch list as for their huge potential, and a lot of multinationals are considering them as markets. There are a few, when we talk about income, there are a few mistakes that companies have made in the past. And for example, assuming that poor countries have no money. The reality is people still spend money on a lot of things, right? So they might not have money for top luxuries, although even that is changing, but they always, I mean, they need to buy food, they need to buy supplies, they have transportation needs. So the assumption that because they are poor, they not have money to consume has actually stopped many companies from investing, and as a result, they've missed opportunities. The fact is that in such countries, people are more concerned with their basic needs. So if we are approaching these countries, we need to offer more basic needs rather than non-essential goods. Yeah, there is also this wrong assumption again that entering developing markets is fruitless because goods there are too cheap to make a profit. That's another mistake, because the reality is big global companies have the opportunity to achieve economies of scale, which are not possible for many of the local producers. So very often they're being very competitive as price leaders in a lot of different industries. So the assumption that just because the country is generally more with lower income, that everything there is cheaper, is also wrong. Another wrong assumption has been that people in the bottom of the pyramid with the lowest income cannot use technology. Actually, this has been proven wrong in more ways than one. And for example, the use of mobile phones have grown tremendously, even in the most poor countries. And a lot of people now have much bigger access to technology. Obviously, it's not the same as in the most developed countries, but nevertheless, we've seen increase in use of technology. There is also this feeling, because many of the first global companies which went into poor countries were criticized a lot for exploiting the poor. But I think today we have a much more understanding on the differences between markets and much more wise way of looking at things. Then we also have high-income countries. So high-income countries are countries with GNI per capita more than 12,000. So these countries are also called advanced, developed, industrialized, or post-industrial countries. And they are characterized by sustained economic growth through disciplined innovation. What that means is that they are not, the fact that they're the most developed doesn't mean that they are kind of standing there. They're actually investing a lot in research, development, and innovation in order to continue this growth. So when you reach that stage, you can continue to grow only through innovation, only through bringing new ways of doing things. In today's world, it also means through making the best use of technology with all its variations available. Also, these countries are characterized with high levels of consumptions. In countries like these, households have extremely high ownership level of basic products. So when you go in a house, there's a lot of appliances, a lot of different gadgets, and a lot of things they use. Sorry. A few more characteristics include the importance of information. The importance of information processing and exchange. There is also a ascendancy of knowledge over capital. So in less developed countries, we often whoever has the capital is kind of ahead of everybody, while here whoever has the knowledge, but the knowledge to a level of being able to create innovation, to create new ideas. This is what's important, because you can, if you have idea you can find the capital in today's world. So intellectual and emotional capacity is becoming kind of the biggest, most sought after skills. It's in general all the qualities that are making us different from machines. So machines are starting to do the routine work, and further progress is dependent on individuals' abilities as far as creativity, innovation, people skills, things like that, the things that machines cannot do. So in general, these countries are more future-oriented. They're really trying to drive further development, further innovation. And in these countries, exactly for the reasons I mentioned, interpersonal relationships are becoming very important. This is the ability of putting teams together, the ability of working with variety and diverse people. This is becoming key because this is where progress is developed. Otherwise, routine, repetitive tasks kind of transferred to more and more to machines. Sorry. A couple of more important things. So we have a few organizations that are kind of important to know. One is the so-called G7, the group of the 7 most industrialized nations. This is USA, Japan, Germany, France, Britain, Canada, and Italy. In 1998, Russia also joined, changing the group to G8, but after the events in 2014, they were taken out, but they remained part of the so-called G20, which was basically uniting 20 countries, including the European Union. This includes developing nations like Argentina, Brazil, India, Indonesia, Turkey. So Russia stayed here. I'm not sure actually what's happening right now. It's possible that they exclude Russia from the group of 20. I'm not sure, but I wouldn't be surprised. We also have the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or the OECD. So it includes 35 nations. It was originated in Paris post the Second World War. Later it was joined by Canada, United States, Japan. So the purpose of the OECD is to promote economic growth and social well-being. So we're trying to support processes that are actually elevating economic growth and well-being across the world. So in order to do that, their focus is on world trade, global issues, labor market regulation, anti-bribery conventions, and anything in general that prevents countries from prospering, both in terms of economic indicators, but also in terms of the well-being of their people. As we enter new markets, we also need to be thinking of product saturation levels. So product saturation levels give us an idea of the stage of development of the market. For example, country like India, they're saying they have 700 million debit cards, but only 700,000 retailers with card readers. So this is showing, again, level of development. It also can impact how we do our business. Well, for example, a country like the United States has 1 card reader per every 25 people. So you see the difference here. So it's in India, it's 1 per 1,000. In the United States, it's 1 per 25,000. Or level of number of cars. So, for example, in India, it's 8 per 1,000, while in a country like Germany, it's 565 per 1,000 in Germany. Another important aspect is the balance of payments. So the balance of payments is a record of all economic transactions in a country between its residents, but also the rest of the world. So we have two main accounts there, which we are basically recording transactions. One is the current account. So the current account is the record of all recurring trade in merchandise and services, as well as humanitarian aid. You can often hear when you listen to some economic analysis of a country, you can hear that they have trade deficit or trade surplus. So basically, trade deficit means that our exports are less than our imports. So we're importing more than we're exporting. So in general, it's considered positive if we have trade surplus. So this means that our country's products are competitive on the global market. As a result, we're exporting more than importing. We also would, another part of the balance of payment is the capital account. So this is the record of all long-term direct investment, portfolio investment, and capital flows in general. Again, here we're looking on whether it's in deficit or surplus. So the balance of payment in general is giving us good idea of the level of a certain country, but also the state of the economy. So it's a big economic factor, something which governments are really concerned with, because it could positively or negatively impact the whole economy. Here you have a few examples of top exporters and importers in the country. So you see here, as far as exporters, China is, according to data from 2015, China is on #1, considerably ahead of United States, for example. While as far as imports, USA is a bigger importer. I mean, this is the reason why also in general United States has had negative balance of trade for many years, because they are importing more than they're exporting. You see the difference between the two numbers is pretty big. Well, for example, if you look at Japan, Japan is much more balanced, with still importing a little more than exporting, while Germany, for years, it has a positive trading balance. So it exports much more than it imports. There are a few more things here we need to consider, especially with regard to international finance. These are things that influence our ability to be successful and to function globally. One is the whole aspect of foreign exchange and exchange risk. As we, I mean, this is from a marketing perspective, it has huge impact on prices. So if the currencies are fluctuating constantly, it's very difficult if our pricing policy is dependent on the home country. Sometimes it's very difficult to maintain certain pricing policy because of this constantly changing exchange rate. So there are a couple of things that we could do in order to minimize exchange rate risk. When we are in general discussing the financial market, there are two terms that are important. is the spot market and the forward market. So the spot market is the market where we trade currencies today, depending on their today value. And the forward market is for future delivery. So basically, we're signing a contract today that, for example, in April next year, we're going to need, I don't know, 1 million, for example, of certain currency. So the forward market is one of the ways in which we're trying to minimize risk, but it costs money, and also it works both ways. So we would minimize the possibility to lose money, but we will also minimize, we will also lose possibility sometimes of winning money. So as we develop our strategy for different markets, we need to understand very well the current market participants. So in some countries, the central banks play a very big role in setting the kind of making changes to devalue, for example, the currency. While in other markets, things are much more left to the free market. So basically, it's the currency rates is freely floating based on supply and demand. So in this case, we're talking of appreciation and depreciation of the currency. There are also a lot of currency speculators. So these are people who are trying to make money out of exchanging currency. So very often, currency speculations are, so there's a big difference, for example, if the currency is appreciating as a result of economic factors or as a result of speculation. If it's appreciating as a result of economic factors, this might be influencing us in some other way, and it is possible that it doesn't matter for us. But when it's speculation alone, it may be taken out of the economic context, so it's cannot be justified, so to say, and that's where bigger problems arise. But the most important is we need to understand. So financial management becomes much more complex. So we cannot take this lightly, because it can be the difference between succeeding and failing in new markets. So this is here what we're talking about: devaluation, revaluation. This is when the government takes specific measures. It has different ways of doing it, but the main thing is the government takes measures to increase or reduce the value of the currency. We also have some countries which do not allow their currency to fluctuate, they fix it. Obviously, they are more easy to deal with with regard to currency risk, because it's a more stable situation. Finally, foreign exchange makes it possible to do business across the boundaries of the national currency. But currency risk adds much more to the turbulence, complexity, interdependency of nations. So it's something, that makes things more difficult. Here there are some examples of supply and demand interaction, just giving you an idea. What we need to remember is even the smallest change in currency actually can result in very big amounts of loss or profit, because when we're talking about international trade, it's about millions, sometimes billion contracts worth billions. So obviously, small changes can actually lead to big losses or gains. Another important aspect is managing economic exposure. So economic exposure refers to the impact of currency fluctuations on the present value of the company's financial performance. For example, Nestle generates 98% of sales outside of home country. This means Nestle is a Swiss company, so it means that they're much less dependent on the Swiss francs than on all kinds of other currency. There are several ways. I already mentioned that forward contracts are one of the ways in which we deal with exchange risk. Another one is hedging. So hedging involves balancing the risk of loss in one currency with a corresponding gain in another currency. So basically, if we have part of our money in dollars, part of it in yen, part of it in Swiss francs, then when we're less dependent, so if one currency we lose, then we gain with the other one. So this is another way we deal with this. Okay, so this ends this part of our session today. So we're gonna now talk about India's economy. So please go to page 89 of your book. And this specifically case study is about the activities which the Prime Minister of India took in an attempt to really foster more economic growth. Did you read this chapter? Not chapter, but case study. In general, in order for our experience, so we will be together for Saturdays going forward. It will be really good if you read in the future the case studies ahead, so that we can have a little discussion. So if you do that, I'm gonna leave more time for that. So less time for the lecture, a little more for discussion. This will greatly improve your experience and learning. So I welcome you in the future to read the case studies. Also, case studies are also important for you because they make things more real. So you understand the real challenges. When we just read the theory, it's very easy to say, oh, we should do this, we should do that. But when we see a real life example, we see how complex things are and how interconnected. And it's very difficult actually to, there's no right decision. There are many different options between which we have to choose. So this case is a lot about economic liberalization activities. For example, one of the things the Prime Minister did is he basically demonetized about 86% of Indians' currency. So he there was a lot of the black market was really big in India. So what he did is he removed certain bills from circulation. I think a total of $200 billion worth bills were taken out of the economy, and he forced people to basically declare, in order to exchange their old money with the new money, they had to declare their incomes, which was a big change that wasn't easy for people. A lot of people could not actually, I mean, this creates a shock in the economy because you're kind of changing the rules of the game. But he was pretty convinced that this needs to be done if India is to become a meaningful player on the world economic stage. So he felt that drastic measures are needed. So this was one of them. He also wanted to remove administrative barriers, to remove a lot of red tape, as we call it. But so some of his measures were controversial. So he introduced a new tax system where with a sales tax ranging from 0 to 28%. But according to some economists, this actually, he wanted to decrease. Yes, I'm seeing here, you're asking me to share the PowerPoint, but I don't have this on a PowerPoint. So this was supposed to be the case. Actually, let me see if I can share the case, but that might be difficult. Maybe like this. Okay, so this is the book. Let me go to page 89. So this is the case about India's economy. And so these are the questions here. No, sorry. Yeah, so the discussion questions, but a lot of people were opposing to Modi's economic liberalization initiatives, and they also thought he was being too populist because he used social media to connect with people, and he had huge number of likes and followers. The main things I was talking about that he did was demonetization and tax reform. So the question, so for example, what do you think about question 2.9? So do you think that the numbers of followers and likes on social media is an indication of his potential as a politician? What do you think about that? Yeah, so I guess nobody read it. So then I'm gonna say a couple of more things and then we go on break. So in general, as a politician today, going and using social media is positive because obviously social media has become part of our life. So it's a major way to actually communicate with people who, I mean, most people don't read political documents and laws and things like that. But if he can communicate why he's doing certain things, he can find bigger support and motivation in people to do also the more difficult things. So, for example, this with his demonetization was a huge shock and problem for many people. But if people understand why it's this important and how this is going to improve their lives in the future, they might be more willing to go through some difficult measures. However, you know very well social media. I mean, you can also buy likes and you can use softwares to create likes. So we need also to be careful how authentic is run this social media channel, and definitely it cannot be a full testament of his popularity, because also social media, especially in a country like India, it's not used by the whole population. I mean, there are many people who still don't probably have access to internet. So we can say that this is more a way of communicating with younger people. So basically, social media is not a testament of his success, but is a testament of his desire to really use modern, progressive ways of communicating with people, and in general, his whole focus on bringing the economy of India forward into the 21st century. Okay, so we're gonna go now in a break. I'm gonna stop the recording.